What if the most powerful dynasty in Europe was undone not by war, rebellion or invasion but by its own blood? In 1634, the Habsburg Empire stood as one of the dominant powers of Europe. War ravaged the continent. Dynasties maneuvered for survival. And within Vienna's Hofburg Palace, a child was born into a family that had ruled for centuries. Her name was Mariana of Austria, and her life would be shaped not by choice, but by the ruthless logic of dynastic preservation. The great mass of the Hofburg Palace lies hushed beneath a sky heavy with snow. Midnight bells toll across the city, their echoes rolling over frozen rooftops and through narrow streets glazed with ice. Within the palace walls, servants move like shadows along torchlit corridors, their footsteps softened by tapestries and frost. Outside the iron gates, the double-headed eagles of the Habsburg dynasty are carved in stone, their wings stiff with winter, guardians of an empire that stretches across Europe and beyond. Inside a candle-lit bedchamber, the air is thick with incense and molten wax, tinged faintly with the metallic scent of blood. A young woman has just given birth. Silk sheets lie crimson-stained, mute testimony to the price of perpetuating one of Europe's most formidable dynasties. In the midwife's arms rests a newborn girl, her face flushed from the struggle of entering the world. Courtiers bow their heads in ritual gratitude. To them, she is another archduchess, another bargaining chip in the grand chessboard of dynastic politics. History, however, will remember her as Mariana of Austria, a woman whose bloodline represented both the zenith and the unraveling of Habsburg power. Her father, Ferdinand III, would ascend as Holy Roman Emperor, ruler of vast Central European territories. Her mother, Maria Anna of Spain, was not merely his consort, but also his cousin and niece, the result of overlapping branches in a family tree that had begun to coil inward upon itself. For generations, the Habsburgs had practiced strategic intermarriage, binding uncle to niece, cousin to cousin, until their lineage resembled not a branching oak, but a tightening circle. The child born that winter night carried within her veins centuries of deliberate entanglement, a calculated attempt to preserve land, titles, and divine legitimacy without dilution by foreign blood. Even in infancy, observers noted the familiar features of her house, the slightly protruding jaw, the heavy lower lip, the so-called Habsburg jaw that court painters would strive to soften but never fully conceal. What contemporaries praised as marks of noble distinction, later centuries would recognize as signs of mandibular prognathism, a visible symptom of prolonged consanguinity. Her birth was celebrated as triumph, yet embedded within that triumph was a silent warning. To understand Mariana's destiny is to understand the arithmetic that governed the House of Habsburg. Since the late Middle Ages, this dynasty had expanded through marriage as much as war. Territories in Spain, Austria, the Low Countries, Italy, and the Americas were woven together through matrimonial strategy. By the reign of Philip II of Spain, the practice of marrying within the family had become entrenched policy. Philip II wed his niece Anna of Austria. Their son, Philip III of Spain, married his cousin. The pattern repeated with relentless logic. Each union tightened the genetic knot, ensuring political cohesion at the cost of biological resilience. In nurseries across Habsburg Europe, infant mortality was heartbreakingly common. Children were born frail, malformed, or sickly. Hydrocephalic skulls, twisted limbs, developmental delays. These tragedies were recorded as God's will, yet they formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. Mariana herself survived childhood, though she bore the unmistakable physiognomy of her lineage. While artists painted her with luminous skin and softened contours, reality lingered beneath the brushstrokes. Her upbringing in Vienna was less about innocence than preparation. Vast maps were unfurled in palace chambers. Alliances were discussed in tones reserved for military campaigns. From infancy, her future had been negotiated. Before she could comprehend the word marriage, she was betrothed to her uncle, Philip IV of Spain. The arrangement was designed to reinforce the bond between the Austrian and Spanish branches of the Habsburgs. The Alps she would one day cross symbolized not adventure but confinement, a passage from one gilded cage to another. In 1649, at 15, Mariana stood before the altar in Vienna, clad in silver brocade, so heavy it dragged across stone floors. The groom was absent. Vows were spoken by proxy. Philip IV, nearly 30 years her senior, awaited her in Madrid. The ceremony glittered with pageantry, yet beneath its splendor lay the stark reality of dynastic necessity. She was niece and bride simultaneously, her role less partner than vessel. Her journey to Spain was long and ceremonial, a procession winding through mountain passes and across arid plains toward the rigid court of Madrid. There at the Alcázar, etiquette was suffocating. Queens were displayed like relics, their movements choreographed, their speech filtered through layers of protocol. Philip IV, weary from wars and haunted by the deaths of previous heirs, greeted his young bride in robes of crimson and gold. At his side stood his daughter from an earlier marriage, nearly Mariana's age, a living reminder of mortality and expectation. Spain demanded a son. Europe watched her womb as intently as generals observed battlefields. In 1651, she gave birth to a daughter, Margaret Teresa of Spain, who survived and later married within the family yet again. Other pregnancies ended in heartbreak. Daughters died in infancy. Sons, briefly hailed as saviors, succumbed to illness. Each tiny coffin borne through Madrid's streets underscored the mounting genetic toll. In 1661, a frail boy was born, Charles II of Spain. His survival was heralded as miraculous. Yet even in childhood, he displayed alarming symptoms, developmental delays, seizures, pronounced facial deformities. His jaw protruded dramatically. His tongue was said to be too large for his mouth. Courtiers whispered that he was bewitched. History would remember him as El Hechizado, the Bewitched, the last Spanish Habsburg. When Philip IV died in 1665, Mariana, only 31, became regent for her 4-year-old son. Draped in black, she entered the political arena, not as pawn but as sovereign guardian of a global empire. Spain's dominions spanned from Europe to the Americas and Asia, yet the empire was strained by war, debt, and internal dissent. Many grandees resented her Austrian origins and her reliance on advisors such as the Jesuit Juan Everardo Nithard. Rival factions coalesced around John of Austria the Younger, the king's illegitimate half-brother. Madrid became a chessboard of intrigue. Crowds chanted against foreign influence. Ministers were elevated and dismissed in rapid succession. Yet Mariana proved politically astute. She negotiated with foreign powers, corresponded with her brother Leopold I, and staved off open civil war through strategic retreats and calculated concessions. When John of Austria marched on Madrid in 1677, she withdrew to Toledo rather than plunge Spain into bloodshed. 2 years later, her rival died, and she returned to court, diminished but unbroken. Meanwhile, Charles' health deteriorated. By adolescence, he could scarcely walk unaided. His fertility was doubtful. Still, the machinery of monarchy demanded continuity. In 1679, he married Marie-Louise of Orléans, a French princess whose vitality seemed to promise renewal. No children came. After her death, he wed Maria Anna of Neuburg, famed for the fecundity of her family. Again, no heir materialized. Europe began drafting partition treaties, dividing Spanish territories in anticipation of extinction. Through it all, Mariana persisted. She maneuvered diplomatically to position the Austrian Habsburgs as rightful successors, even as the very bloodline she defended had produced a king incapable of perpetuating it. The irony was bitter. The strategy designed to preserve unity had ensured sterility. In 1696, weakened by age and grief, Mariana lay dying in Madrid. Around her hung portraits of lost children, and a son whose fragile body embodied the culmination of centuries of calculated inbreeding. She died before witnessing the War of the Spanish Succession, before the crown passed to the Bourbon dynasty of France, ending 3 centuries of Habsburg dominance in Spain. Her funeral wound through Madrid in solemn procession, black velvet and torchlight flickering against stone. She was laid to rest at El Escorial, the vast royal mausoleum built by her forebears. To many Spaniards, she was no longer the Austrian bride but the Queen Mother, who had held a faltering empire together. Mariana of Austria remains a paradox. She was among the most inbred royals in European history, the living embodiment of dynastic obsession. Yet she was also resilient, politically capable, and formidable in a world that mistrusted female authority. She governed during decades of crisis, preserving Spain's dignity even as its power waned. Her life illustrates a stark lesson. Power concentrated too narrowly becomes self-destructive. The arithmetic of blood, ignored for generations, eventually demanded balance. In Mariana's lifetime, the equation still held. Barely. After her, it collapsed. The Habsburg experiment in genetic preservation ended not in triumph but in sterility. Yet within that tragedy stands the figure of a woman who, veiled in black, fought inevitability with intelligence and endurance. She could not alter biology, but she shaped history. If you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history, the rise and fall of empires, and the secrets royal families tried to bury, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover the stories that shaped the world.